Mental health. That's a buzz phrase. Hashtag mental health. Hey, this is our video series called The Struggle is Real. Because the struggle to talk about mental health and be mentally healthy is real. You're probably wondering why you should listen to anything that we have to say.
We think that we're really funny and smart, but
yeah, but we know we might have to convince you.
the jury is out. And so we're both PhD students at Queen's University.
That's in Canada.
We're also roommates and best friends.
So my name is Kaylee.
My name is Vanessa.
We're gonna talk about some stuff.
Some super sweet stuff. So listen, we're gonna be talking about mental health today. And I can already tell that people are starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable in their seats. They're shifting, they're looking at their feet. But what we have to do is we have to talk about mental health. Because people are really, really bad about talking about it. We've now accepted that mental health and mental illness is like this thing in the world.
Like it exists.
It exists.
We basically just acknowledge that it exists.
But nobody really knows what it is, and everyone's a little bit uncomfortable and scared about it. Mental illness and mental health are these phrases that have been thrown around so many times now that people have become familiar with them, and this has kind of led people to believe that then they have a good understanding of that. But the thing is that we've realized in our experiences is if people had a really good understanding of things related to mental health, then they wouldn't be so scared and uncomfortable about talking about them. And not having a good understanding of mental health has a really big impact for how we treat people who struggle with mental health issues.
Absolutely.
If you're feeling uncomfortable, it means that you can't relate to mental illness or you don't understand mental illness, and so you want to get the F out of here.
Because if you've never had a mental illness, then you assume that if someone has a mental illness, they are like categorically different than you are, which makes it like somewhat threatening, because we get a little bit freaked out when we think that people are very different than us, because we feel like we can't understand them, and that makes us uncomfortable.
Because right now what we think about it is you have a mental disorder or you're totally fine.
And we know a lot of people that don't have mental disorders that are not totally fine.
Yeah, this is what in the biz we call black and white thinking. It doesn't lead to good things. You're gonna have a bad time.
But we need to start thinking about mental health on this continuum, which is the same way that we think about physical health. You don't ever describe yourself or think about other people as perfectly healthy or not healthy at all. But that's how we think about mental health. We think that people are either perfectly okay or not okay at all. It's also important to remember that sometimes people are just born with things that make them slightly less physically healthy than somebody else, but we don't really like penalize them for that the same way we do for mental health. So you might be born with seasonal allergies, for example, but no one walks around and says like, oh, did you hear about Sally? She has seasonal allergies. And like nobody freaks out about that because it's just not a big deal. It's a big deal for Sally. She's really upset for like 3 months of the year when she has to take Claritin every day, but we don't like stigmatize her because she has seasonal allergies. For physical health, we tend to just think that people are doing the best that they can and they're trying to be as healthy as they can. And that's how we should be thinking about mental health, that we should all just be trying to be as mentally healthy as we can, but that none of us are perfect.
And there's going to be times where you're kicking ass at your physical health. You know, you're going for runs, you're walking your dog all the time.
Eating all the celery.
Exactly. And then there's times where, you know, it's winter and you don't ever want to leave your house. And so you just continually make pizzas all the time. And that's okay too.
The main reason we have such a problem with people having mental health issues and us getting really caught up on like that being a big deal and something that freaks us out is because we have stigma. Stigma is this thing, I don't know what stigma is. Explain to us what stigma is.
Alright, now I know what Stigma is.
The University of Google
tells us that stigma, it's something about you, either a quality or a circumstance, and society has attached some sort of like disgrace or shame or disapproval to that. And so, as you can imagine, this is a really, really big thing for mental health. Having mental illness has been associated with something that is shameful, that you're weak or you're just not enough.
Ultimately, it just classifies you as all of a sudden this undesirable human, which is really painful.
Okay, so what we do as people, which isn't very nice, is when we're talking about somebody with a mental health issue, we make that the most important thing about them. We attach it as like their identity or their identifying characteristic. So instead of saying something like, hey, this is a person who struggles with anxiety or depression, we say, oh, this is an anxious person, or this is a depressed person, or a schizophrenic person. And that basically tells you everything you need to know about that person. And what we do is we stop caring about all those amazing million other things that make that person who they were, and a person that you would probably get along with really well. And so instead of just seeing them as someone who's currently having a problem with something, we see it as something that is here now and that will be here forever. And that's not very nice.
Because it makes us forget that there's a million other things that we could connect with that person about. Instead, we're focusing on the one thing that we might not have in common.
Stigma is hella tricky though. Because most people don't even realize that they're acting in a stigmatizing way. If we went up and asked a whole bunch of people whether individuals with mental illness are weak or broken or less than, you're likely to hear everyone give a resounding no. These people should be treated with compassion and included. Even though we may believe that people with mental illness should be treated with respect and compassion, our actions don't always communicate that we believe that. And there's this really interesting reason for why that is. Kaylee?
I'll tell you. The craziest thing about stigma that I have learned is that a lot of stigma comes from very subconscious things that are happening in our brains. Science. When someone says something that we don't perfectly understand, our brain goes into hyperdrive to try and make sense of what we think we might have heard. So the parts of our brain that process languaging, if we were in some kind of brain scanner, you would see it lighting up as it's working extra hard to make sense of it. But if we were told that the person we were talking to had a mental illness or a mental disorder, our brains wouldn't do the same processing, so you wouldn't see that same hyperdrive being kicked in. And this process is really important because if our brains are kicking into hyperdrive to try and make sense of what someone is saying, we have all this inadvertent body language that communicates to somebody that we really care about what we're saying and we really want to understand what they're saying, and it just leads us to connect with them a lot stronger. And if our brains aren't doing that, then we're not giving those people that information and we're really just disengaging from what they're saying.
And this doesn't sound very nice, but we don't intentionally do this.
This actually happens within 400 milliseconds of hearing a word that you might not understand.
And you might think that 400 milliseconds is not enough time to do anything. And you're right. It is a very short amount of time. But good news, this doesn't mean you're a jerk, because it's not really under our conscious control. But biases are things that we've learned. And the great thing about that is it means we can learn something new. So we can work really hard and consciously try to be compassionate and engaged with people and try to see the person behind the disorder instead of just kind of falling back to our biases. And it takes a little bit of work, but we know you guys like hard work. And you're smart because you're watching this video. Alright, so we obviously love talking about mental health, and so we want to make you us. But how do you do that? It's hard work.
It's a lot of work.
So we're gonna talk about this next time as well, because we can do a whole thing about exactly what to say. But we can send you off with some helpful things.
We'd be cruel people if we didn't. Get your finger out of there.
And the first thing is just understanding more about mental health, which is what you guys did today.
You did it.
Good job. Notice the language that you use. And when you're talking about somebody who has a mental illness, instead of saying a depressed person, say a person who is struggling with depression right now. And see how often that you do that.
Because that's what you would say if they were physically unwell. You would say a person who has a cold. You wouldn't say a cold person. That makes no sense.
A sniffly nose.
A sniffly, sneezy person. You wouldn't do that. You also wouldn't say a cancerized person. You would say a person who has cancer.
A cancerized?
Cancerized.
Exactly, because it implies that it'll be the rest of their life, and that's it. That's all you need to know about them.
And that is the most important thing about that person.
But we know now that it's not.
It's not. It's not.
Also, notice if you say things like crazy or nuts, insane when you're describing people's behaviors. And is there another way you can talk about that person that's not so jerky?
It's also really important to remember that it's okay to make mistakes when you're talking about mental health.
Yes.
A friend might tell you how they've been feeling really depressed and how they're a little freaked out and they're not feeling very well. And you might get really nervous and not know what to say and then blurt out something really embarrassing and weird. And that's okay. All you need to do is apologize and say, you know what, I don't have a lot of experience talking about this. Can you tell me the best way to support you?
Yeah. Because if you're gonna wait to say the perfect thing, because it's so hard to be politically correct, we never know what is okay to say and what's not okay to say, we're never going to be there for our friends. And so Be okay with making mistakes.
So remember to think about mental health a lot more like physical health. We've all had some experience with not feeling super mentally healthy, so we can relate to people if they're not doing well.
And your challenge for this week, do a little drum roll.
Okay.
And so your challenge for this week is to have a conversation with somebody about mental health. It doesn't have to be your own mental health, or it can be someone that you've known, but just bring it up with somebody and notice how they react to it. Did you make them a little bit uncomfortable? How do they respond? What are the words that they use? Just notice how people talk about mental illness.
So really great segues to having a conversation about mental health might be,
hey man, I have just been so stressed in my job, I don't really know how to deal with it. Oh, I just found out that my uncle struggles with depression. I don't really know a lot about it. Like, do you know anything about it?
that's a good one. You could also even just say, hey, I listened to this super sweet little video about mental health stuff and it was really interesting. Let me tell you everything that I learned.
I like that one. So, thanks for listening to us. It might sound a little ranty because we feel so passionate about mental health and we like to talk about it. But next week, we're going to talk more about how we actually can talk about it. What are the words that we can use? Because that can be really tricky. So, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah.
Cheers!
Cheers!
Cheers! You have to drink it too. Oh shit.
Hey, what are you doing here? How did you find this video?
Where'd you get this?
Where did you get this?
Say people instead of humans. People, yeah, humans. Humans! I sound like an alien? I'm like an alien invader. My humans!
The humans are doing weird things again.
Think of another way to describe the situation. Or maybe just mind your own fucking business. Hey. Hi. When I was writing my thesis, my skin turned gray, I didn't want to get out of bed, and I just rode my bike crying all the time around town.
There was a time last year in school where I was very sad and thought that I should probably drop out of school and just go become like a fisherman somewhere.